boys and girls, and welcome to another edition of Reading with the Letter People, sponsored by the National Letter People Museum. We're so excited to have you here today, and I want you to meet my new friend, Mr. X. Mr. X is all wrong, but he's not a bad guy. You can see he's all wrong because, look, where his foot is should be a hand, and where his hand is should be a foot. He's all wrong. How fun. Mr. X wants you to know that, boys and girls, when you see his letter on a bottle or something like that, it means to stop and turn away. X. Mr. X is kind of special because his sound is actually the sound when Mr. K and Mr. S stand next to each other, and only at the end of words. For example, fox, F-O-X. You hear it, X. That's the sound that Mr. X makes. Mr. X, we're glad you're here, and we've got a really cool story for you. As you can see, boys and girls, at the top is a capital X, and underneath is a lowercase x. And again, Mr. X's sound is from the same sound that's all wrong. All right, our story today about Mr. X is the Inimitable Mr. X. Now, boys and girls, that special word means unique or special, and Mr. X is very unique and very special in Letter People land. Mr. X always has problems following directions. One day, his friend, Exandria, thinks of a way to help him. She brings a box of cake mix to his house. Mr. X, would you like me to bake a cake? Asks Exandria. Can I bake a cake all by myself? Asks Mr. X. If you follow directions on this box, says Exandria, it'll be easy. You must remember not to change anything. I will remember, says Mr. X. Good, says Exandria. I will telephone you later. Mr. X looks at himself in the mirror. I cannot bake a cake unless I look like a baker, he says. Mr. X hurries to the store. I will buy this baker's tall white hat, he said. I will buy this baker's big white apron. Next, I need some baking things. I will buy these baking pans, mixing bowls, and rolling pins. All these things will make me a fine baker. Mr. X goes home. He puts on his tall white hat. He puts on his big white apron. He fills his counter with baking pans, mixing bowls, and rolling pins. He looks in the mirror. Now I look like a baker, smiles Mr. X. I will surely bake a fine cake. I hope he does, boys and girls. Mr. X picks up a box of cake mix. He begins to read the directions. I always had trouble following directions, he says. Exandria said I must remember not to change anything. The first direction is easy to follow. I have to empty the cake mix into a bowl. I can do that. But the next direction is strange. I have to put an egg into the bowl. What will happen with the eggshell? I wonder if it will melt. I don't understand, sighs Mr. X, but I'll do it. I promise not to change anything. The next direction is even more confusing to Mr. X. He reads, put a teaspoon of water into the bowl. Mr. X sighs again. I have water, but I do not have a special spoon for tea, he says. I do not have any time to buy one. I'll have to make one. Mr. X opens his kitchen cabinet. He finds a tea bag and he finds a spoon. I will tie the tea bag around the spoon, he says. Now I can put it into the bowl with the cake mix, the egg, and the water. This time I am certainly following the directions. I'm not changing anything. But I never knew all the strange things bakers use to make a cake. The next direction puzzles Mr. X the most. He reads, put a half a cup of milk into the bowl. I have milk, says Mr. X, but all my cups are whole. I don't know. The store sells a half a cup. I'll have to break one of my cups. I promise to follow the directions. I cannot change anything. Now, boys and girls, isn't that a little silly? He is surely being unique and inimitable. Suddenly, Mr. X's telephone rings. It's Exandria. Mr. X, are you following the directions? She asks. Oh yes, says Mr. X. I put an egg into the bowl. I hope the shell melts. I tied a tea bag to a spoon. I made a teaspoon. It's in the bowl. I am following the directions. Exandria is so surprised she cannot speak. Poor Mr. X. I have one problem, continues Mr. X. I did not buy half a cup, but I will break one of my whole cups into 2 pieces, and I will put 1 piece into the bowl. Exandria cannot believe what she's hearing. Please, Mr. X, she says, don't put anything else into the bowl until I get to your house. Mr. X hangs up the telephone. Exandria will be proud of me, he said. This time I'm following the directions. I will make icing for my cake while I wait for her. Mr. X opens the freezer door. He takes out a tray of ice cubes. Before he can put the tray on the counter, the doorbell rings. It's Exandria. She's carrying a large cake box. Exandria, says Mr. X, will you teach me how to make pink ice cubes? Why do you want pink ice cubes? Asks Exandria. I want pink icing for my cake, says Mr. X. Exandria shakes her head. She thinks only Mr. X would use a tea bag to make a teaspoon. That's all wrong, isn't it, boys and girls? Only Mr. X would use ice cubes to make icing. What is wrong? Exandria asked herself. Why can't Mr. X follow direction? Exandria looks at Mr. X's mixing bowl. She thinks about each thing Mr. X has put into it. Suddenly she knows what's wrong. This mess is my fault, she says. I gave Mr. X directions to follow. He tried to follow them, but he could not. He did not understand the directions. People cannot follow directions they don't understand. Poor Mr. X. Let's all say it together. Poor Mr. X. I cannot let him bake this cake. What can I do? Exandria thinks of a plan. She must be careful not to hurt Mr. X's feelings. Mr. X, she says, will you help me? Of course, answers Mr. X. I can make pink ice cubes later. I'm worried, says Exandria. If you bake a cake today, I'll have no one to eat this cake. Exandria opens her cake box. Mr. X looks at the cake. He sees whipped cream, cherries, and pink icing. He looks at his mixing bowl. He sees an egg with a shell. He sees a spoon with a tea bag. Mr. X looks at the dripping ice tray in his hand. He takes off his tall white hat and he sits down. Exandria cuts a slice of cake. Mr. X never baked his cake that day. However, he learned how to be a great baker. Exandria helped him understand baking directions. Then he was able to follow them. Look at all the cakes he made all by himself. Boys and girls, thank you so much for tuning in and learning the story about Mr. X. Come watch next time. We have so many other great stories. Thanks for watching.
Hello, Letter People fans. Thank you for watching today's video. Please like, subscribe, and hit that bell for notifications. Comment down below who your favorite letter person is. Thank you for supporting the National Letter People Museum.